Well, time has arrived. So we're going to go ahead and get started. A few more, I think we're missing just a couple more, but hopefully they'll be here shortly and joining us for a special day today. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Roberto Ramirez, and I am the Assistant Division Chief of the Special Population Statistics in the Census Bureau's Population Division. I would like to welcome all of you to the United States Census Bureau headquarters. This incredible building is home to some of the nation's finest researchers who spend their days exploring ways to improve the measurement of our nation's people, places, and economy. And you are all here to help us with a key part of our work, collecting and providing data on the diverse population of the United States. We deeply thank you for joining us today. So before we begin, note the sheet in front of you, which describes the emergency safety procedures. There's a sheet that should be right in front of you, so please take a note of that. The most important thing to know is that if the siren sounds, please leave the building as soon as possible through the emergency exits. Don't worry, I'll be right behind you. But hopefully that won't happen, and we'll have a full day of interesting discussion. I am honored to host the expert forum on ethnic groups from the Middle East and North Africa. This forum is truly historic. The Census Bureau is committed to collecting quality data on all national origin, ethnic, and racial groups in the United States. And we have a long tradition of stakeholder engagement since the first racial and ethnic advisory committees were formed in the late 1970s. This is precisely why we invited you, as experts and community leaders here today from across the country. We need your feedback and advice on our classification plans for our Middle Eastern and North African category. Your feedback is very important to us, as it helps us to continue our research plans for the 2020 census. Yes, we know it's 5 years away, but it actually takes about 8 years to prepare for a census. So I'm very happy for you all to be here. However, please know that we're not seeking 100% consensus on these topics today. We recognize the rich cultural history of nationalities and ethnic groups from the Middle East and North Africa and their important contributions to all American society over the generations. With that being said, I want to remind you that this forum is not a political or religious forum. We are not here to discuss political or religious views, but to collect as much feedback as possible on the classification of Middle Eastern and North African responses to the race and ethnic question on the census questionnaire. This forum will be based on the United States life experience and not on the groups living outside of the United States. The Census Bureau is a data collection agency, and we do a fine job of doing that. And we do not create policies. We are not trying to determine minority status for the Middle Eastern and North African population. Our intention is to develop the means for enumerating all people of the United States who have roots, descent, ancestry, or heritage from this region of the world, to help them express their own identity within our diverse and complex American experience. We need your help to accomplish this. Your feedback to us will be officially documented for the public record. Today's forum is being webcast, and we'll plan to release our formal proceedings later this fall. Today's meetings not only enhances our relationships we all have making with one another, but also provides us with a foundation of developing a deeper understanding of the Middle Eastern and North African community in the United States and the community's unique and shared characteristics. Okay, so before we begin today's presentations, I would like to introduce some members of the census staff who have worked incredibly hard to make today's forum a reality. Enrique Lamas, please stand up, is our Associate Director of Demographic Programs. Karen Humes is our Division Chief of the Population Division. Nicholas Jones is the Director of the Race and Ethnic Research and Outreach. Meraris Rios is the newly appointed Chief of Ethnicity and Ancestry Branch. Angie Buchanan is our Senior Analyst on Ancestry in the Ethnicity and Ancestry Branch. Rachel Marks is the Analyst of Ancestry in the Ethnicity and Ancestry Branch. And Beverly Pratt from the Racial Statistics Branch taking notes for our forum today. We also have several other staff members from our division, as well as from the decennial Management Division, and our colleagues from the Office of Management and Budget who are here also with us today. Now, I would like to ask you all to briefly introduce yourselves. Please state your name and affiliation as we go around the room. So I'm going to start here with Rhonda, and then we're just going to make our way around and go to that table, we go to this table, and that table. So please, Rhonda. Yes, and speak to the mic. There's a little button that you just touch.
My name is Rhonda Kayali. I think I know a lot of you in this room. I am on the board of the Arab American Studies Association and a professor, adjunct.
Thank you.
I'm Helen Samhan, and I am affiliated with the Arab American Institute and Foundation.
I'm Maya Berry, also with the Arab American Institute.
Margaret Lowry. I am also with the Arab American Institute.
Iman Awad, not with the Arab American Institute, but with the Maryland Governor's Office for the Commission on Middle Eastern American Affairs.
Louise Kankar. I'm a professor at Marquette University. I'm the president-elect of the Arab American Studies Association, and I'm a board member of the Arab American Action Network.
Excellent. Please, over here.
Cristina Mora, Assistant Professor of Sociology at UC Berkeley.
Jermaine Awad, Associate Professor, University of Texas at Austin.
Fatma Müge Göçek, Sociology, Professor of Sociology and Women's Studies, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor.
Soniala Judge, the President of the Amazigh Cultural Association in America.
Sumia Itlahaj, and the Boston Amazigh communities in Boston.
Excellent. Thank you. Rita.
Rita Stefan, former census employee and now with the State Department.
Sally Howell, Associate Professor of History and Arab American Studies at the University of Michigan, Dearborn.
Linda Sarsour, I'm the Executive Director at the Arab American Association of New York.
Oren Hyman, Chairman of Moatza Mekomit, New York, the umbrella organization of the Israeli community in the New York area.
I'm Joe Kassab. I'm the president and the founder of the Iraqi Christian Advocacy and Empowerment Institute. This is my fourth decennial that I'm working on. I started in 1984.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
Great.
you.
Please.
Khalid Beydoun, law professor at the Berry School of Law.
Sahar Aziz, associate professor at Texas A&M School of Law.
John Tranian, professor of law at Southwestern Law School. Morad Gorban, I'm with the Public Affairs Alliance of Iranian Americans.
This back table, yep, please.
Mehdi Bozorgman, I teach sociology at the City University of New York.
Eric Ketchum, I'm in the PhD program at the City University of New York.
Yüksel Sernak from Kurdish American Society.
Peter Scary, I teach political science at Boston College.
Yinon Cohen, sociology. I'm professor of sociology at Columbia University, also professor of Israel and Jewish studies.
Steve Gold, Michigan State University Sociology.
Okay, is that everyone?
One more.
Oh, sorry, did I miss any?
Fareed Zain al-Abdin, board chairman, Sudanese American Public Affairs Association.
Great. All right, I believe that's everyone here. So besides the ones that the experts and community leaders that we invited here today, we also have an additional 9 or 10 other ones that unfortunately couldn't join us today. And they're also providing us feedback, and we're looking forward to hearing from them soon. So thank you very much, everyone. So please, for today's agenda, I asked everyone to pull out their binder and follow along with me. I hope everyone in here has a binder. It's really critical and important that you have one, because this is the feedback about what you're going to provide us today. It has all the documentation in there. So Karen Humes will provide opening remarks, and Helen Sandham will share a brief history of the support for the Middle Eastern and North African category in the United States. After that, we'll engage in the 5 topical sessions you'll have prepared for, and you all will be invited to provide feedback after each session. So I think that's very critical that I highlight that. This is not just about us presenting to you. We need your feedback. So after each session, we have a number of questions that we're going to be asking you, okay? And so what we're going to do is that if you have a question or a comment, we're going to ask you to put your name placard up like this. You know, you have it exactly, like Rita It's showing you right there. And then we'll call on you to make sure everybody has a voice, everybody can say what their comments or issues are, and have that discourse throughout the day, okay? So after each session, if you will, we'll be entertaining questions and comments. Nicholas Jones will start off with Session A, testing a Middle Eastern North African category on the 2015 National Content Test. Then I will lead Session B, discussion on the term Middle Eastern or North African. After a short break at 11 o'clock, I will present Session C, which focuses on the Census Bureau working classification of Middle Eastern or North African, and we will continue that discussion after lunch. Following that, Menares Rios will present Session D, potential data products featuring Middle Eastern and North African data. Then we will hear from the Director of the Census, John Thompson. Finally, I will close the forum on Session E, where we'll talk about next steps as we prepare for the 2020 census. We expect this to be an incredibly rich and robust discussion, and we plan to adjourn around 4, hopefully. We'll see how it goes, right? Now, I am honored to introduce to you Karen Humes. Karen spent much of her career producing and analyzing statistics from censuses and surveys on the demographic characteristics of different populations in the United States. She authored an important historical article on the evolution of racial and ethnic categories in the U.S. Census, and has contributed to many important census briefs and reports. We are happy that Karen was appointed as the division chief of the Population Division this past year. Karen?
Good morning, everyone. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to the U.S. Census Bureau. The first thing that I would like to do is actually recognize the considerable efforts that have been made by members of the Census Bureau's National Advisory Committee on Racial, Ethnic, and Other Populations. Members such as Akram Kader, Morad Gorban, Hassan Jaber, as well as Ms. Helen Samhan, who is actually a former member of the Commerce Department's Decennial Census Advisory Committee. All of these members have made great contributions to our efforts to improve the quality of the race and ethnic data that we collect here at the U.S. Census Bureau. Okay. Well, since the 1980s, the Census Bureau has actually collected and published data on the populations of Middle Eastern and North African heritage in the United States through the use of the ancestry question that was on the Decennial Census Long Form and is currently on the American Community Survey. And so now, for the first time, we are testing the possible inclusion of a Middle Eastern or North African category in the race and ethnicity questions for the 2020 census. And we recognize that this development has really stemmed from a lot of the leadership support from many of you who are in the room today, as well as from a lot of community support that has come from many of the organizations that are represented in the room today. And really, it's been over the years we've gotten guidance and feedback and great advice that has really been valuable to us as we have developed our plans for research and our plans for actually conducting outreach efforts. And so today's event is one more opportunity for us to get feedback from all of you to help us as we're thinking through how we want to classify Middle Eastern and North African populations for the 2020 census. I am very much looking forward to the engaging discussions that will go on today. And I know that there may be many different points of view in the room today, and that's okay. We want to hear what you guys have to say. And we don't expect that there will be consensus on every item, and we don't expect there will be complete agreement on every topic that we cover. And again, that's okay. We really want your feedback and to hear what you have to say, because that will be very valuable to us, again, as we're making our plans for 2020. And the Census Bureau, I just wanted to reiterate something Roberto said, that we are committed to testing a Middle Eastern or North African category in our 2015 National Content Test, which you'll hear much more about in a few minutes. And it's really the results of that test, along with feedback from the community and feedback from other stakeholders, which will show us the way forward. Okay. Another thing that I think is important to know is that it was the participation of the Middle Eastern and North African community that was very valuable in our overall efforts to have a successful decennial census in 2010. And we definitely plan to continue that partnership and that collaboration as we prepare for 2020. So once again, I would like to welcome all of you to the U.S. Census Bureau. I hope that you enjoy your day here with us. And I want to deeply thank you for giving us your time, your energy, and your wisdom today. So with that, I would like to turn things over to Helen Samhan, who, as she mentioned earlier, is affiliated with the Arab American Institute. And Helen will come up and give us a brief history of the support for a Middle Eastern and North African category.
Thank you, Karen, and hello to everybody. My job this morning is to provide a little bit of a context and historical overview of how we got to where we are today. And I'm speaking mostly as an advocate in the Arab American community, and I know that many of you in the room represent other constituencies. But I will share the work that we have done as Arab Americans and then have expanded to include others in the region. So our work first began in the 1980s as advocates for the ancestry question. AAI got involved in the mid-80s to try to better capture data on Arab Americans. And we've been a national partner with the Census Bureau in each decennial census since 1990. In the mid-90s, the Arab American community was offered a seat on the Decennial Advisory Committee, and that seat was held by ADC from 1994 until 2011. And after 2011, when the advisory committee was reorganized, the new advisory committee, I'm sorry, could I get some water? The new advisory committee on racial and ethnic and special populations now includes 3 seats that represent the various MENA region. In the 1990s, there was a question about retaining the ancestry question on the decennial census form. So we formed a working group on ancestry in the U.S. Census. Thank you. Okay, yes. And that working group lobbied Congress basically to save the ancestry question. And in 2001, we applied to be a census information center. So the Arab American Institute became the first and only organization that was a repository for data on Arab ancestry in the United States, and AAI has been a census information center ever since. In 2010, we sort of changed gears because in 2010 it was the first short form only census. And that meant that in the outreach for the decennial census, there was no opportunity for people from either Arab Americans or from other MENA region. There was no opportunity for them to identify on the form. So many organizations encouraged their members to basically use the some other race category to self-identify of their own ethnic or racial identification. And that really produced a lot of data that the Census Bureau was able to see. People who felt that the existing racial categories, the undifferentiated racial categories, were not really responsive to who they felt that they were. So many, many people filled in the some other race category. And the Census Bureau has had a chance to analyze that data. After they had a chance to analyze that data, they invited the first community briefing of people from the Middle East region organizations. And that happened in 2011, thanks to Rita Stephan, who helped organize that. And it was really that meeting in 2011 that kicked off the current campaign to push for testing on people from the MENA region. And we've been working really hard ever since then. We formed a coalition. Many of you in the room are part of that coalition, and some of you have not yet joined our advocacy group. But we have some common positions and beliefs that we would like to share this morning before our meeting gets off. And then one other important development I think is to mention is that we got very serious attention from the Census Bureau. We've had a number of meetings with the director, with the senior staff, and we were invited by the Office of Management and Budget's Interagency Committee on Race and Ethnic Measurement to make a presentation last summer on the importance of testing a MENA category. And the one central goal in all of this outreach and advocacy work is to improve participation in the census, to get more data, better data, and that will be of use to service organizations and researchers. Next slide. So what we do know from the ancestry question is that the ancestry question reveals that there are about 3.2 million people in the United States with origins in the MENA region. Our definition, our coalition's definition of the MENA region is all of the Arab League countries, Israel, Iran, Turkey, and all of the minority communities that reside in the Middle East. That is our working definition. We're going to be talking, of course, more today about the working definition that the Census Bureau will use. And we've already said that this ancestry data is, while it's not very robust, it's not tabulated in the same way that race and ethnic data are tabulated. However, we do learn some things from the ancestry data. And we learned, for example, that people from the MENA region have characteristics that differ from the overall white population, which is where our data is subsumed. For example, family size in the MENA population is larger than the overall white population. There is a considerably lower percentage of native-born population. 52% of the MENA communities are native-born versus 97% of the overall white population. There's a higher percentage of households where English is spoken less than very well. In the overall white population, it's 2%. In the MENA population, it's 22%. And then our community tends to be younger than the overall white population. Our median age is 32, and the average white age is 42. Next slide. What you see here is another thing that we learned from the ancestry data, and that is the composition of the MENA communities. And it's important to note that this is based on ancestry data from the most recent 3-year, I think it's the 2011 to 2013 ACS. And we show you this so that you can see the proportionality of the various communities. Now you'll notice that aside from the two large communities, the Lebanese and the Iranian, there is a rather large piece of the pie that is just Arab or Arabic. And that is an interesting indication, I think, for a lot of researchers to show that, because this is all self-identification. This means that someone wrote that on the form. And I think it's so interesting to use these self-identification as measures of changing identities as well. Next slide. I wanted to spend a few minutes just to talk about what we believe in our coalition the MENA category does. One is it's really a very rare opportunity to get accurate data on US populations. It will provide 100% data as opposed to the limited data of the sample surveys, and it will improve data quality. We believe that the boundaries should reflect the most practical, inclusive definition of populations who share common US integration experiences and service needs. Next slide. What the MENA from our perspective, what the MENA category does not do is it does not confer or alter primary ethnic identity. Because we believe that because it's based on self-identification, we believe that we will still get all the detailed data that we want on subgroups. However, it's going to be presented under a regional heading. We are not proposing a new identification for people from the Middle East. The MENA is also it's a regional designation that actually originates in the Office of Management and Budget. It is the way the Caucasian race is currently defined as people from Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. So the MENA region really comes from that, and it is not, as I think Roberto mentioned, it's not a philosophical, political, historical term. And the final thing is important to note is that we believe that it's really not a racial identification as well. People from the MENA region, like people of Hispanic origin, can identify with any and many or all races. And the final thing that's not on the slide is that this MENA category testing is actually not an initiative of the federal government. It is something that the community has proposed. And in this climate of surveillance and security, I think there will be many people in our communities who are suspicious. Why is the Census Bureau all of a sudden collecting data on people from the Middle East region? And that suspicion is well-founded. But we believe that on balance, the data that we will collect from this category is worth it, and it's up to us as advocates and researchers to make sure that that the data is used for good purposes. Next slide. The recommended scope of our coalition is that we believe it should be people with origins in the geographic boundaries of all the member nations of the League of Arab States, which means not only North African Arab states, but sub-Saharan African Arab states. We believe that the Arabic language is more of an important unifier than the continental position of the country. So we believe Somalia, Sudan, Mauritania, that people from those regions should be grandfathered into the MENA region because they have more in common with people from the MENA region than they do with the other Africans. And of course, we believe that it should include the other non-Arab countries of the Middle East, Iran, Israel, Turkey. And we also believe it should include all ethnic minorities and subgroups that reside in the region, the Amazigh, the Kurds, and Chaldeans, Assyrians, etc. Next slide. This data actually does not come from the Census Bureau. This comes from the immigration statistics. And we thought it was important for you to see that over the last 25 years, there's been some interesting spikes in immigration from MENA countries. And these 5 countries are the fastest growing countries from the MENA region where people are settling. So you'll see that over the past 5 years, while this shows a bit of a trend over time, when you add up by each country of origin over the 25 years, people from Iraq there have been 212,000 immigrants and refugees from Iraq. From Egypt, 155,000, Somalia, 138,000, Morocco, 78,000, and Sudan, 60,000. When you add up all the MENA countries over this 25-year period, it's over 1.5 million immigrants and refugees just from that period alone. Next slide. The slide that you see here is not going to be in your binders, but this is the way that our coalition had proposed to the Census Bureau to test the MENA ethnicity question. Our belief was that it would be more recognizable to people if we presented it alongside Hispanic origin as an ethnicity, and then people can choose whatever racial identity they would like. We're going to be discussing the way in which the Census Bureau is going to be testing it, and even though we understand this may not be in the cards, we wanted to share with you that this was our proposed method of testing. Next slide. So the last slide has to do with the examples that we recommend to be used in the testing this September. Currently, and we'll talk about that a lot today, currently the methodology of the Bureau is to use the largest groups represented in the US ancestry data. We believe, however, that it's more important to have examples that show the diversity of the people from the region. So instead of having the largest countries from the Middle East and the largest countries from North Africa, meaning the largest populations, we believe it's important to have the breadth and scope of the populations from this region. So we are proposing that for the largest communities, which are Lebanese and Syrian, we think Lebanon should be a good example. We believe there should be a North African example. Egypt is the largest. We think it's important to have a sub-Saharan Arab country also used as an example, such as Sudan or Somalia. The Arabian Gulf, the Arabian Peninsula, I should say, is also underrepresented in any examples. We think that Yemen, which has a large community here, should be used as an example. The non-Arab MENA countries, Iran is clearly the largest of those. We think that that should be an example. And finally, we think that one of the sub-national ethnicities, like Assyrian or Chaldean, should be used as an example because that indicates people who are not from a nation state, but are from a distinct ethnic community within those nation states should see themselves in the examples. And with that, I'm going to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to a good discussion.
Thank you, Helen, for sharing your important perspective with us today. Okay, so how many of you is this light up here bothering? Can you guys see the slides okay? Is this a blinding? Is it bothering you? Yeah, I see many of you squinting, and I had someone tell. So, and I agree because it is. There you go. There you go. How about that? Is that better? Okay, we can leave that one on over there. I think I'm fine with that. Okay, I just want to make sure that you can see me, of course, and then see the slides and see the presenters up here. Okay, all right. Yes, everything that you see today, we'll provide copies, obviously, after the forum, and it'll be, or at least our presentations will be available online, but we certainly can distribute Helen's PowerPoint as well to everyone here. We have everyone's email list. Okay, so now I would like to introduce Nicholas Jones, who will lead us in our first discussion session, Session A, Testing a Middle Eastern and North African Category on the 2015 National Content Test. Nicholas was recently appointed as the Director of Race and Ethnic Research and Outreach in the Census Bureau Population Division after serving 6 years as Chief of the Racial Statistics Branch. Nicholas is a key leader of the Census Bureau's extensive research to explore alternative ways and approaches for collecting data on race and ethnicity, which have started with the 2010 Census Alternative Questionnaire Experiment, or the AQE, which you'll probably hear a lot about today. And he's leading our ongoing efforts for racial and ethnic research and outreach in preparation for the design of the 2020 census. Please help me join me, Nicholas.
Thanks, Roberto. Good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased and excited to be here with you today as we talk about this important work. This important gathering for our work is important not only for the Census Bureau, but for our nation's work to provide data on communities of Middle Eastern and North African heritage. This morning, I'm going to provide an overview of the public comments that we received this year on our testing plans for the 2015 National Content Test to include a Middle Eastern and North African category. And I'll also provide you with an overview of the plans for our research with the 2015 National Content Test. But before we talk about our research efforts, it's really important that we frame the context for today's discussions. So on the next slide, to help you prepare for the discussions, we provided reference materials such as the 1997 U.S. Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, Race and Ethnic Standards. Meredith this afternoon will talk about these standards in more detail during Session D, but to help us set the context for today's discussions, it's important that we go over the federal government's definition of the white racial category. As you can see on the slide, this is the definition that pertains to the current racial classification of Middle Eastern groups and North African groups in the United States. White is defined as a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. And note the importance of the concept original peoples in the white racial definition. This is the philosophy behind the current federal government definitions for this category, our coding procedures, our tabulation procedures for responses to the race question. This is why detailed responses such as German or Lebanese or Egyptian are coded currently as part of the white racial category. Meredith will talk about this and more examples during our afternoon session. Now, as you undoubtedly know by now, this is not a new topic of discussion. We had some great introductory remarks by Helen to help us get the context for where we are today. As Helen mentioned, in fact, the OMB and the Census Bureau and other federal statistical agencies contemplated the inclusion of a category for persons of Arab or Middle Eastern heritage during the 1990s. During the mid-1990s, OMB received a number of requests from the public to add a category for Arabs or Middle Easterners so that useful data could be obtained for monitoring discrimination. However, the public comment process during that period indicated there was no agreement on a definition for this category and a new category was not created. As part of the 1997 OMB recommendations, OMB advised that further research should be done to determine the best way to improve data for this population group. And over the past decade and a half, OMB and the federal statistical system have continued to face many challenges, including a growing number of population groups who find the current race and ethnic classification system confusing, if not irrelevant, to their own experience, or who wish to see their own group highlighted on a specific questionnaire. Leading up to the 2010 census, as Helen mentioned, many communities, including Iranians, Arabs, Brazilians, Hispanics, Jamaicans, and many others, raised concerns about how they should identify with the questions on race for the 2010 census. And they launched campaigns to advise members of their community on how to answer the questions, mainly by filling in and writing their own identities on the some other race category. These concerns were a major impetus for the research that we undertook at the Census Bureau in 2010, as Roberto mentioned, our 2010 Census Alternative Questionnaire Experiment research on race and Hispanic origin. This comprehensive effort explored ways to improve the accuracy and the reliability of the results by expanding our understanding of how respondents self-identify given the context of different questions that we pose. Our goals were to improve the data that we collect and the data that we tabulate for the United States. A key component of the AQE research was a series of qualitative focus groups, 67 that took place around the country, that were commissioned to supplement and complement the data that we collected quantitatively. These focus groups are racially, ethnically, and geographically diverse, and 6 of our focus groups were with respondents of Middle Eastern and North African heritage in Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, New York, and Washington, D.C. The AQE research provided us with insights to issues respondents have with the questions. They also helped us understand the reasons behind these issues, and we learned that many participants across all the focus groups felt the inclusion of the examples Egyptian and Lebanese in the white racial category was wrong and inaccurate. These comments were often connected to the recommendation that there be a separate category for those who would identify as Middle Eastern, North African, or Arab. In addition to this important research, the Census Bureau's engagement and consultation efforts with external stakeholders, such as yourselves, our advisors, researchers, and community organizations, they've informed and contextualized the work that we're doing today. For example, in July of 2013, the Census Bureau and OMB received a formal letter from the Arab American Institute and 25 co-signing organizations and researchers requesting a Middle Eastern and North African category be tested for the 2020 census. In response to this request, the Census Bureau started conducting research on the classification of responses from the Middle East and North Africa and sought advice from myriad stakeholders, which we'll discuss with you in a few minutes. So what has happened over the past year? Last summer, the Census Bureau's National Advisory Committee on Racial, Ethnic, and Other Populations recommended that the Census Bureau should test a separate Middle Eastern or North African category within the race and ethnicity questions. Last fall, the Census Bureau officially announced that a Middle Eastern or North African category would be tested as part of the 2015 National Content Test Key Dimensions. Over the winter, the notice for public comment across the United States was published in the Federal Register notice, and public comment resulted in extensive feedback. Meanwhile, our staff worked on extensive research to understand how currently different federal agencies, organizations, and research universities in the United States classify this region of the world in terms of a working definition for this category. All of this while planning and developing this exciting forum that we have for you today, and we're so pleased to be here and to get your feedback. Next, I'm going to talk about the notice for public comment on the plans for the 2015 National Content Test, which was published in the Federal Register on December 2nd. The Census Bureau alerted members of our National Advisory Committee and hundreds of other stakeholders and advisors and research colleagues and community leaders across the country about the release of the Federal Register notice and the request for public feedback. In addition, we shared this message during our public briefings last fall and last winter, and our ongoing research and engagement helped elicit public comments on the research plans. Late last year, we developed the 2015 National Content Test pre-submission materials for the U.S. Department of Commerce to publish this Federal Register Notice, or FRN. The FRN presented the overall objectives for the 2015 National Content Test. The notice described the research dimensions for 2020 census content which are being addressed in the research, that being race and ethnicity, relationship, and within household coverage. The FRN also requested public feedback on the research plans. All of the comments that we received from the public were reviewed by Census Bureau experts. Responses were developed to address each of the different topics, and these responses are included in a briefing document describing the 2015 NCT plans and the public comments received on the test, which are currently under review by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget for approval. The responses will be made public later this year, and today we'll brief you on the feedback that we received. Public comments came in from around the country, from individuals, from organizations, and from groups of people who collaborated together to submit their comments. Many of you in the room submitted comments, and we're really happy with that. We received 4,550 submissions about the testing plans through the Federal Register process. These submissions generally contained one or two comments about the test, but many were multi-page letters that provided extensive feedback on different aspects of the test. In total, these submissions included a total of 13,116 comments. Now, our graphic illustrates how one submission might contain one or two or three individual distinct comments. We reviewed and analyzed all of those submissions and categorized all the comments into various topics. In the end, we had 58 different topics for which we received submissions. And today I'll walk you through the major public comment topics and talk about how we're addressing them in the research. We received a total of 4,509 submissions relating to testing a Middle Eastern or North African category. These submissions included a total of 12,293 comments covering 11 different topic areas. Now, we also received comments on 47 other topic areas, but as you can tell, the vast majority of these comments were about testing a Middle Eastern or North African category. We received other comments related to relationship, other aspects of the race and ethnicity question, within household coverage, language, and other aspects of the test. But again, the vast majority of these comments were about testing a Middle Eastern or North African category. Next, I'm going to talk about some of those highlights. The largest topic within the comments, 4,473 comments, expressed strong support for testing a Middle Eastern or North African category. We received thousands of submissions from around the country expressing support for this category and detailing why this data is critical for this community. In comparison, 15 comments did not support testing a category. The second major set of comments, with 3,727 comments, expressed strong disagreement with the classification of Middle Eastern or North African as white, which, as you know, is how these responses are currently classified in federal statistics on race. The third major set of comments, 3,301 comments, advised the Census Bureau that this population is racially diverse. Additionally, 737 comments offered suggestions for the inclusion or exclusion of various countries or ethnic groups as being part of the Middle Eastern or North African category. As you know, we plan to test in the 2015 National Content Test a category of Middle Eastern or North African, and the results of the 2015 NCT research will inform recommendations on the potential inclusion of this category for the 2020 census. So in summary, our responses to these public comments are currently under review with OMB as part of the clearance process for the 2015 NCT research plans. The responses will be made public later this year, and we're confident that our plans provide a strong foundation for examining the issues and the topics raised by public comments for testing a Middle Eastern or North African category, and also allowing us to explore new designs for the questions on race and ethnicity. We'll continue to meet with stakeholders and advisors such as yourselves throughout the years as we talk about our mid-decade research and findings, and we embrace these discussions. They're not only important for us as part of this preparation of the 2015 NCT, but they provide a strong foundation for the 2020 census. Now, as I mentioned before, and I want to reiterate this, our engagement and our discussions with advisors, with stakeholders, and with colleagues like yourselves has really helped inform where we are today and our plans for the 2015 National Content Test. We're very excited about our prospective research this year, which will help us address many of the major comments that we heard from the public. And next, I'm going to talk with you in detail about the plans for the NCT. The Census Bureau's 2015 National Content Test, or NCT, will begin in the late summer of 2015. It's just a few months away with the Census Day of September 1st. We'll be using a nationally representative sample with oversampling of key population groups. This sample will include 1.2 million households in the United States, and we'll have an oversample with specifics that are under development, but we wanted to note that for the first time ever, this will include oversampling of the Middle Eastern and North African population in the United States. What we plan to accomplish through the NCT is to test key content areas related to race and ethnicity, relationship, and within household coverage. And as you may be aware, by early 2017, not too far away, the 2020 census topics are due to be submitted to Congress, with the final wording for these questions due to Congress in April of 2018. The 2015 National Content Test is our primary mid-decade opportunity to compare different types of content strategies prior to making decisions and recommendations for the 2020 census content. Through this test, we'll also continue looking at our contact strategies for optimizing self-response, particularly internet response, building on tests that we've done in 2014 and earlier this year. The NCT will include a re-interview operation to further assess the accuracy and the reliability of these data based on alternative questions for race and ethnicity. The re-interview sample will include approximately 100,000 cases to help us do this. And the NCT is a self-response test only. I wanted to note that we'll not have a non-response interview follow-up component. So what are our goals? As we prepare for the 2020 census and our mid-decade research and testing, we're exploring 4 key dimensions. These research dimensions build upon the successful results from the 2010 AQE, the first dimension being question format. As we continue to do this testing, we're researching the separate questions approach for race and Hispanic origin, as well as the combined question approach, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. The second dimension of our research examines the response categories by exploring how to collect and tabulate data for respondents of Middle Eastern and North African origin. The third dimension pertains to the wording of the questions themselves and also the question terminology that we use by examining ways to optimize detailed reporting and to improve respondent understanding of the options that they have to report multiple race and ethnic groups. The fourth dimension is using web-based technology with the internet, with smartphones, tablets, with telephone questionnaire assistants to really enhance the designs that we have that can help us go much more beyond paper to optimize reporting of detailed racial and ethnic groups. So before I continue, I want to draw your attention to this slide. On the left-hand side, we have one of the panels representing a separate questions approach that we explored during the 2010 AQE. This has a Hispanic origin question and a race question. On the right hand of the slide, we have one of the panels representing a combined question approach for race and ethnicity that we explored during the 2010 AQE. When the 2010 AQE research was conducted, we announced and we explained that we were emphasizing we're looking for research strategies. We were testing not to pick the question for 2020 10 years ahead of time, but to really help us understand how we can move forward with successful work. We also advised that we expected to continue to do this research during the decade to build upon the successes of the AQE in order to make recommendations for 2020. Building upon these successful results, the 2015 National Content Test will further evaluate the separate questions approach and the combined question approach that you see here as Dimension 1. These approaches will be tested with and without a distinct Middle Eastern and North African category, and the results and the findings from the NCT will inform recommendations to OMB and the Federal Interagency Committee on the question design format for the 2020 census. Now, as most, if not all of you know, we announced last fall, again, that the 2015 NCT will evaluate the use of a Middle Eastern or North African category. This is Dimension 2 of our research. We considered many different design approaches for these questions in our work over the past year, including suggestions like the one that Helen showed earlier and other ideas that we received from various groups around the country. We developed and we qualitatively tested question designs to collect data for both major categories such as white, black, Asian, Middle Eastern, or North African, but also to collect that detailed data for groups such as Cuban, Samoan, Egyptian, Somalian. We're testing a number of different options for the NCT, and we've provided other examples in the reference materials in your notebooks. The point I want to emphasize here with this slide is that for Dimension 2 of this research, we're testing alternative approaches for including or excluding a distinct Middle Eastern or North African category. This slide example provides 2 of those dimensions that we're looking at. The image on the left includes Middle Eastern or North African examples, such as Lebanese and Egyptian, as part of the white racial category. The image on the right places a distinct Middle Eastern or North African category among the options for selecting one or more of the race or origin groups. The third dimension of our race and ethnic research for the NCT is to evaluate the use of alternative instruction wording and terminology for improving respondent understanding of the questions that we're asking and the options that they have to report. So for example, recent qualitative research showed us that the instruction to mark X one or more boxes is frequently overlooked by respondents. Many stop reading the instruction after seeing that visual cue of an X, and they do that. They mark one box. They don't read the rest of the instruction that says they can mark one or more boxes. They've overlooked it. We found through our research and our qualitative work that we're testing alternative instruction wording to mark all boxes that apply, removing the X, and noting that people may report more than one group in an effort to really improve the clarity of the question, to help respondents understand that they can mark more than one group and they can select as many as that would apply. In our research, we'll also evaluate the use of alternative terminology to describe these concepts and these questions of race, ethnicity, and origin. And based on positive results from our work this year, we're looking at recent qualitative testing which showed another approach is promising, to ask an open-ended question. Which categories describe you? We found that respondents don't have an issue with understanding what this means, and they usually don't, they're finding that they can find what the question is asking for them to report without using the words race, ethnicity, or origin. So we're testing that as well. Finally, with the advantage of new technology to collect data via web-based designs, the fourth dimension of our research is to test a combined question with detailed checkboxes for soliciting detailed racial and ethnic origins. Now, this web-based design is not just limited to the internet. You don't have to only do it on your computer at home or in your office. It will also enable people to answer the questions for the census on your smartphone, on your tablet, using a call-in feature with telephone questionnaire assistance over the phone. The approach for web-based designs provides a series of screens to collect all of the data that we're looking for major groups such as white, Hispanic, Middle Eastern, North African, Black, Asian, etc., but also for detailed groups like Samoan, Iranian, Filipino, Jamaican, Puerto Rican, and Irish. On the initial screen that you see here, we collect data on the major categories via a checkbox and examples. These are shown for the 6 largest detailed groups representing the geographic diversity of the OMB group's definition. So for example, if a respondent were to click here that they are Middle Eastern or North African and then click Next, they'll find that for the categories they receive, they get a subsequent screen which presents several detailed checkbox options and a dedicated write-in area where they can provide additional responses. So in our example, where the respondent clicked that they were Middle Eastern or North African, a follow-up screen collects their detailed groups, such as Iranian or Moroccan. And the respondents can enter more additional information to represent multiple groups, such as Iraqi or Palestinian. And after they click Next, similar screens will collect data for all communities, such as Samoan, Irish, Mexican, etc. Detailed data for the major OMB categories contain dozens or even hundreds of different national origin and ethnic groups. However, our analysis of recent decennial census data and American Community Survey data show that for most major OMB categories and their populations in the United States, a handful of detailed groups represent the vast majority of their respective population. Our research identified the largest groups in the United States reported for which these different geographic regions are represented, and we referenced each of them in the OMB race and ethnic definitions. In our designs, our goal is to provide equity and balance. This is for the approach for collecting categories, the examples that we use, and our design rationale for soliciting detailed groups. In order to provide sufficient examples and also ensure that the groups which had checkboxes on the 2010 census form are represented in our new designs, we include 6 examples for each category to represent the diversity of that OMB definition for the group, and we list them in population size order from largest to smallest. We'll talk about how we identify the examples for Middle Eastern and North African groups in the next few slides. This graphic shows a special tabulation from the 2013 American Community Survey data on Ancestry for Middle Eastern responses and for North African responses. The yellow bars at the top represent the largest Middle Eastern ancestries reported in the United States in 2013, and the blue bars represent the largest North African ancestries reported in the United States. What we see here is that the 3 largest Middle Eastern ancestries reported were Lebanese, Iranian, and Syrian. And the 3 largest North African ancestries reported were Egyptian, Moroccan, and Algerian. We use these 6 groups together in our NCT panels to represent Middle Eastern responses and North African responses for the categories that we're testing. Now, taking a closer look, this image shows the Middle Eastern or North African category that we're employing in our research designs. We utilize a major checkbox with the category named Middle Eastern or North African, along with 6 example groups, and a dedicated write-in space for respondents to enter their detailed ethnicities, such as Lebanese or Egyptian. We've presented our plans for testing this new Middle Eastern or North African category to many of our research colleagues, to stakeholder groups, and to advisors over the past 6 months, and we've received great feedback and encouragement for this research. We're very interested in hearing your feedback today. To start the conversation, we've posed 3 discussion questions that relate to our plans for moving towards the 2020 census with this research. The first question is, do you have a preference for the combined question approach or the separate questions approach for race and Hispanic origin? The second question is, do you think that the Middle Eastern and North African responses should be classified as white? The third question is, what do you think about the examples shown in the Middle Eastern or North African category in the questionnaire? So when you have a comment, I'd ask that you please turn your name placard on its side so that we can see each of you that have a question, and I'll call on you in turn as we go through the discussion. Okay, so you can go ahead and turn your placards up. I'm going to start over here with Louise. And please remember to click your mic, and the red light will come on.
I just want to say I find very disturbing that Black people from the MENA region have been excluded. I don't know why. People from majority Black countries have been excluded from the category of MENA in your definition, and I don't understand why that is being done, and I don't agree with it.
Okay. So, Louise, thank you for your comment. In the next session, what we're going to talk about specifically is the classification that we've come up with in terms of how currently agencies, universities, and organizations categorize the group Middle Eastern or North African. We're going to get into an extensive dialogue about the groups that are currently in that definition, and we want to get your feedback in that session about why you suggest that other groups should be included. That's the feedback that we were looking for there. So I want to ask you that we hold that until we present the next topic, and really we will dig into that concept. Okay. What I wanted to say about the reporting, self-identification, when we show these examples for reporting one or more groups, we're looking for people to report any and all the responses that they have. So if they see themselves as a Black Middle Eastern respondent, they can report that in the question and have that data tabulated. We're looking to see through the different types of questions that we pose whether we're getting that accurate reporting from the re-interview, or if we're finding that people who are, for example, Black and Middle Eastern don't report it because of the different options that we presented.
So can I comment on dimension 4 or
yes.
These? Okay.
Do you mind going to that slide for dimension 4?
I just think that if you have if you put MENA in the race category here, and you have Somali as an example for Black, then is a Somali likely to check the MENA category? I mean, realistically, are people likely to check both
and that's
categories?
exactly what we're trying to find out from this research. So
yeah.
Given the examples that we use, given the placements that we have, all of the definitions are what currently roots our classification system. So for example, with the Black population being defined as the Black racial groups of Africa, those are population groups that we have looked to from the data to provide examples of. With white being defined as Middle Eastern, North African, or European, that's where we make the distinction currently for this research. What we're trying to find out is how do respondents react to that? Given an option where Somali may be part of that definition, as an example, maybe another group is not, how will you respond? Not only if you're Somali, if you're Sudanese, if you're Ethiopian, you're Nigerian, where are people reporting their detailed origin? And then what do we learn from that when we have the re-interview? That's exactly what this research is going to show us. We don't have the answers yet, but we know those are the complexities that we're looking into to see what will happen. Thank you for your comments. Rhonda.
I might suggest that, going back to that Dimension 4 screen, that if you're rethinking what you're going to term it as, so instead of saying for race, initial screen for race and ethnicity, you know, that maybe isn't the right term.
Right, and we're looking at that too. So when I mentioned, for example, in our third dimension of this research, we're testing the use of race, ethnicity, origin, and none of those terms on all different types of variations. So the 4 dimensions, they cross. So when we have dimension 1, separate versus combined, that's going to have a MENA category. It's not going to have a MENA category. Dimension 2, it will have different terminology, different instructions across each of those dimensions. It will also use a web-based design and paper design. So we're showing you one example of what we're testing, but keep in mind that all of those dimensions are being crossed so that we'll find, if you have an open-ended question, does that get us more accurate data compared to when we call it race? or ethnicity or
Or
origin.
do people tend to just check one box, even
Where-
online? Because
Mhm.
I think, for me, that's one of the concerns, is that online, you're sort of used to just checking one answer. You know,
Right.
yes, no, or
And that's where
whatever
we're
it is.
looking to try to test different instructions, where we already know from our research that the mark X, one or more, has shown that respondents mark one. So we're looking for the mark all that apply to see if that will provide us an improvement, both on paper and on internet, and then we're going to be able to analyze that to see what the results are. So these are the dimensions. We don't have the answers yet, but from the work that we've been doing, we expect that we can find improvements by tweaking what we're asking, how we're presenting it, and then look to get the feedback. I have a question from Christina, and I'm going to make my way around the room, so please keep your placards up. Christina?
Okay. In regards to the first discussion question about the combination or the separation, and in thinking about the dimension one slide, sorry, in thinking
Yes.
about the dimension one slide about the separate or the combined, I know that there's a large movement among sort of Latino advocates and within the Hispanic population to do the combined and not keep a separate sort of Hispanic question, in large part because within the Hispanic population, if you invert the sort of logic, many of them don't see them as covered by white, black, Native American or whatnot, and many of them see Latino as a racialized category. Now, keeping that in mind and thinking about the MENA category, is there an option then? So we're thinking one option would be the combined, but I'm also thinking about the Helen slide. Would there be an option then of just a separate MENA question? If the Hispanic becomes part of the combined.
So Roberto and I
That's a
can
good question.
respond to
Yeah,
that.
we're gonna, so that's a great question,
sorry if I'm
absolutely.
forecasting.
And actually, that's one of the reasons why we actually we're testing a combined approach, because exactly what she's talking about. The historical separate question, the ethnicity and race question, has been very, very problematic for the Latino population, actually. Increasingly, they're not finding themselves in the race questions, as you said. They'll usually just report they're Latino again. They'll say, I'm Mexican, and they'll say they're Mexican again. Or they'll just leave the race question blank. So one of the design strategies that came out of the AQE said, well, perhaps we need to combine these race and ethnicity categories into one. We were concerned about having a separate MENA ethnicity question because we thought we were going to have the same issues. In fact, according to our AQE focus groups, I know you can't generalize focus group findings, but we did do a number of focus groups, as Nicholas said, during the 2010 census with the AQE. And consistently, many of the participants said, I don't find myself here. I prefer a separate category within these categories here. And then oftentimes when we did present a MENA category, they found themselves really easily in the combined style approach. So. Right.
So I guess I just want to highlight the difficulty of the two
Can you
logic-
speak into the mic?
Sure. I guess I just want to highlight the difficulty of the two logics. On the one logic, you would have this is a multiracial population, so that's also some of the ways that people describe the Latino population. But on the other hand, if you say that, then there's some sort of basic assumption that the categories, the racial categories that exist, sort of would cover most of the population at hand. So I think it's just that difficulty of keeping in mind.
And
Right.
thank you for your comments. These are the complexities that we're working with. So we know, for example, from the AQE work where we had a combined question approach, that people more readily found themselves. We also found that multiple reporting was higher in the combined question because people saw the ability to check more than one box. It was a much cleaner presentation. They weren't hung up on the separate distinctions between race and origin. So these are the things that are really encouraging where we're thinking that works.
And we don't want to steal Meradi's thunder, because
we're
in
gonna-
her presentation, we're exactly going to go over a couple of scenarios about that. What happens if they check white and black, or MENA and black, or MENA and white? And so that's one of the things that we're highlighting in this test that we're doing, that we're encouraging, we're improving our instructions for you well for multiple responses, race and ethnicity.
For how people self-identify, and that's the key component for our re-interview. We're looking to find out from these questions, how do you respond to the different items that we pose? And then when we call you back and we talk about it in more detail, are you matching what you told us or not? We learned already from the AQE about those mismatches, primarily for the separation of race and Hispanic origin. That's what we want to be able to do more with this work. particularly for the Middle Eastern, North African population, for the Afro-Caribbean population, for American Indian populations. That's why this research is so important and so compelling for us to be able to take
Also, if I
forward.
may add real quickly, I know, don't forget in your binder, at the very back of your binder, you'll see examples of some of the different paper questionnaire experiments that we have there. So there's a lot of different variations that you see, okay? Okay, so we're
So
going to go
I want to
on.
go next to, and I know I said put the placards on the side, but it's Gigi. Thank you, Gigi. If you can turn your mic on, thank you.
Hi. So, being the research nerd that I am, when I was here in
You're in good company.
when I was here in 2011, you presented the streamlined approach as a possible option, and so, given that I had funding for a study, I decided to test it.
Okay.
With about a little over 500 Middle Eastern, North African individuals. In that sample, about 86% picked the MENA category, about 10% picked the white category. My question with the either in discussing whether or not you're going to have the streamlined versus the ethnicity separate question, I mean, it's sort of, making the decisions on what's going to capture the most diversity, right? So we're really not getting at least within this particular sample, which is convenience, obviously, that those 10%, we don't know what they may necessarily put down, and it would be a question of coding, right? So once even and the people in my sample were actually MENA people. So, but the MENA category by itself got the majority of the participants, so it worked that way, but it does not capture racial diversity, right? So it captures a pan-ethnic geographical designation. And so my question is, if you have the separate ethnicity category, where in the follow-up race category, are the people that would have put MENA, this would be similar to the Hispanic question, are they supposed to then fill out some other race, or is there going to actually also be an additional racial category just for people who just say, I'm MENA and I'm MENA, or Lebanese?
So that's what Roberto talked to in reference to Christina's comment, that currently what we're seeing when we have a separate concept of origin or ethnicity, of which there's two defined, Hispanic and non-Hispanic, and then a separate concept of race, where Hispanic is not one of those categories, we often find that Hispanics answer the first question, leave the second question blank, or answer it in the same way that they reported before. On top of that, what we learned from AQE is that when many Hispanics do report their race, the re-interview showed that that really wasn't what they identified with. They did it as well, I guess I'll choose one of these options, or this is the one you wanted me to choose, but it's not my identity. With this re-interview for the AQE, we're extending that into the same type of re-interview that we're doing for the 2015 NCT. We want to find out, when you report on a separate question or a combined question, when we ask you all these detailed options about your re-interview follow-up, what are you telling us about your identity? And just the other point, Gigi, I wanted to make about the streamlined version, she's talking about this type of an approach. We call it streamlined because people found themselves in a very streamlined manner. All the options are listed equally. We're looking to not only collect the larger data in terms of major category boxes, but also the detailed information. And we're testing different options for wording, check boxes, write-in lines, to see how we can get the best high-level data, but also detailed data for all communities. And that's what the goal of this work is to do.
I also want to mention, I don't think we're doing unfortunately, we don't have 3 days here, right, to talk about all the plans that we're doing for the content test. But I think what's missing here is that, keep in mind, there's many experimental forms that we're going to be testing in the test, okay? Not just these right here, which you'll see many in your binders. So, Gigi, to go back to your question, we're going to have questionnaire designs where there is a MENA box, there is not a MENA box, okay? So we're also testing the improvement of different question wording, for example. So you're saying, what happens if they just take MENA? I don't have their race, right? Well, we're going to be improving we're improving the instructions to see if they check multiple boxes or not, with some of the experiment panels that we're talking about here. What we're finding, much more like the MENA, your findings, by the way, are fascinating, and very similar to what we found in our focus groups. They don't want to say they're white or black. They're mostly saying they're MENA. It's very much like the Latinos. This is what we're finding, okay? But we're going to find out in this nationally representative sample that we're doing, and by the way, we're going to toot our own horn here. The AQE at the time, 5 years ago, was the largest, one of the largest race and ethnicity studies we ever done at the Census Bureau, which is hard to believe because we've been collecting this data since our first census in 1790, it's our oldest question we have. This test coming up this fall, by fall, it doubles it, 1.2 million housing units. We had 500,000 in AQE, now we have over 1 million. And we're oversampling for this MENA population, targeting this population. Hopefully, they'll respond. We'll see how they respond to all these different experimental panels, okay? All right, let's go on to the next question.
Fatma?
Yes, thank you. One observation in general. I think that in the context of the Middle East and North Africa, the issue is not going to be about the Arab category of Arabs. I mean, be it race or ethnicity, however you define it. It's going to be with the problem is going to be the non-Arabs. I mean, and how do you then include in the non-Arab population all these very disparate groups, ranging from Turks, Moroccans, North Africans, Kurds, Israelis, and all these. I mean, that probably is going to be the most contentious issue. So, I mean, so when you're thinking of race and ethnicity, are you then going to have Arab and non-Arab? It's like the Hispanic and non-Hispanic.
Yeah.
That's just, yeah.
To answer your question, yes, we don't want to steal the thunder. We're actually going to, that'll be my session, the hardest session,
Yes.
which will be the working classification. But I assure you that we have Arab and non-Arab ethnicities and nationalities, and we'll talk about these particular groups that you mentioned. So we're going to, very similarly, we'll talk about our proposed classification, then we want to hear from you if there's anyone else we need to add or not add. Now, by the way, what's critical here, you're giving us feedback now, but it's critical that you fill out your forms, by the way, and your binder. You gotta, and by the way, I like to have your name at the corner, not to point anyone out, and please write your responses there. Hey, you're missing this, or we're not happy with this, or et cetera. So we need your feedback because we're gonna produce a summary report from this expert forum. This findings is gonna feed into, hopefully down the road, our recommendations of how we collect and tabulate and classify the Middle Eastern North African population.
Right.
Okay.
One other point I wanted to make, I brought up this slide for Dimension 4, thank you, Rachel, is that we're looking to see how, given these different examples, of which there's more than just the 6 that we have because we go into the internet-based modes, we use examples for the write-in line that include the next largest groups from the Middle East and North Africa, which includes Israel, Iraqi, and my glasses are bad, Tunisian. Because we want to see if you're listed as a group, does that help you respond? If you're not listed as a group, do you not respond? Given these different panels, we're looking to see what we're proposing, how does that impact all respondents, not just the respondents that are in the biggest group, Lebanese, but how do other respondents from that region report or not report per their interview? So that's a huge part of our work to see what effectively works or doesn't work.
Okay.
One question I have in addition, how did Middle East and North African come to be included in the white to start with?
Okay, so this is a question that I, for better or for worse, I may look a lot older than I am. We weren't the creators of the definitions, but it goes back in the history of the federal government's inclusion of these concepts back to the 1970s where the first racial and ethnic groups were determined. These are all geographically based, and Roberto and Benedicte are going to talk about it in our next session. The term white includes the geographic references of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. In a way to other categories, for example, the Asian category references the Far East, Southeast Asia, and the Indian subcontinent. They all reference geographic places for which there are these category definitions.
Remember, the definitions are in your binder, so you can see how it's documented and worded there.
Right. So, can you speak into the mic, Rita?
The term was defined by the court in 1910, or I think Helen wrote an article about that. Yeah, so it's way before we
That's
were
a long
born.
story. Okay, so in the interest of time, we're doing okay, but I want to make sure I get to everyone here because we have a lot of placards up. So if we don't mind, can we go to the next
Yes.
speaker? Are we missing
Who
someone?
do I see back there? Sonia? Yes, thank you. If you
Please.
can please speak into the mic and state your name.
Hi, it's Sonia. And my question is, looking at the people reporting selected Middle Eastern and North African Ancestries from 2013. I would like to know where do you include minorities in between Middle Eastern or North Africans? Because a lot of small groups, they are from Africa, and they don't know which one to choose. And the other, because this will mislead in the population count in the American data. And the other thing, what do you call a small group? How small is small? What's the number?
So great comments, great questions. For this particular graphic, this is the graphic that shows the Middle Eastern groups and the North African groups as the bar chart. This is all based on current ancestry data. And what it's meant to reflect is that these are the groups that are the largest self-reported ancestries from the Middle East and North Africa.
In the United
States.
In the United States.
There are many, many other groups that are smaller in size, but for the purpose of this tabulation, we just wanted to show the groups that reported the largest numbers. So our goal for the research we're doing for 2020 is to collect and be able to tabulate and report data on all groups here in the United States. We're going to talk later this afternoon about the coding operation that we have, where we take self-reported responses and we put them into different categories. So we have many, 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 as I mentioned, hundreds and hundreds of different groups for race, ethnicity, origin from around the world that are here in the United States. We're looking to collect and tabulate that detailed data. So this is just one representation of what we currently see as the largest, but it is in no means meant to represent these are the only groups that we collect and tabulate. Okay, I want to move over to this table next. So,
Oh, wait, we got one more
oh,
over
I'm
here.
sorry, I did not see the placard.
That's fine, most of my questions were asked, but just going back, I also had a question with MENA, how did that come about? But also in the category.
Do you mind speaking into the mic a little bit?
The Black or African American. So why was I guess in terms of you mentioned the origin, how MENA came about, but was there consideration to put North Africans in the African Americans or Black category?
So again, the definitions that we have that are based in the 1977 standards that were revised in 1997, the work we're doing now is really part of this whole historical context that we're seeing that many people don't see themselves in the groups that are currently defined. We're trying to understand how do people self-identify and how do they report in ways of improving the data that looks towards the future. So part of this, we're looking to see how do sub-Saharan groups, North African groups, Afro-Caribbean groups, groups who may be of, quote, Black origin from Asia or from South America, how do they respond when we have these different options?
Or from France.
France is another good example that we use that, you know, these definitions that are rooted in geography, again, they are the basis of the classifications and the tabulations that we provide, but we know that the world is much more complex, right? So we're looking to see how do people respond and what can we make from that complexity.
Sorry, if I just could do just a small follow-up.
Sure.
So just in terms of how does that make, like, the response for that is, I guess because of the, the political tension, this is not the place for it, but the political tension, the impact of that category would, I guess, representing the Amazigh groups, for instance, or the Tuareg, they would choose other, or, you know, African American. So I guess my question is, how do you kind of balance the impact, the negative impact, especially with the, you know, eruption of conflict in political tension?
So we're looking to see from this research, again, how do people self-identify? And is it what reflects their identity? Or are they not answering the question, for example, if they don't see themselves? Do they skip it? Do they write in something else in the line called some other race, more often than they would in the place where we have the example? Would someone who is French, when we have an example there, just write French in the some other race line? They said, I'm not white, I'm French. Well, we're looking to find out what does that mean and why. So we have a lot of examples like that where the world is very complex. Brazil is a big example. Who are Brazilians? Are they white? Are they Black? Are they multiracial? Are they Asian? How do Brazilians in the United States respond to these questions? So for all the communities that are represented here in this room and around the country, we're looking to find out the best ways that we can collect this complex data that represents your identities. I'm going to go here to Rita and then to Linda.
I'm just going to ask you for clarification for the
Sure.
group.
Please.
If we can go to dimension 1, please. The option, to answer your question, do you have preference for combined or separate? Can you please clarify to the group if we have separate questions, then for the MENA population, the only option is the examples under white. They do not get a separate, what's, are you?
Okay, so I
Middle
will
Eastern
clarify
or-
that. So this is meant to represent the current questions that we were testing in the AQE, where we had a separate question on race and origin, and a combined question on race or origin, but in AQE, none of those included a Middle Eastern or North African category.
But
When
in
I
the
took-
national testing.
In the
that's
national test, we will have both the dimension with MENA in separate and without MENA in separate, and also with
Will
MENA
there
in
be a
combined.
question saying, are you of MENA origin, such as the Hispanic question, or no?
No, and that's what Roberto was talking to earlier when he said that we already know from our research that these separate question approaches lead to less accurate data, more non-response, and so if we're looking to exacerbate that problem and do it again, we don't feel like that's the strategy to move forward with.
So if
So
we're
we're-
all rational actors, there's more data for us in the combined question.
We're looking to find that out from the research, but that's what the science points to.
Since, let's talk about it for a second. We have a few, so we don't have all the experimental panels. I believe they're all in the binders, not all 8 of them?
But there are a lot of examples in the back of your binder.
One of the experimental panels that we have is the separate, and we have a MENA category in here. Okay? I think my voice is a little strong enough now. Okay? So, oh yeah, that's right, for those folks on the web. Okay, and then of course we have the streamlined approach where we have, right now there's no MENA category. This is one of the experimental panels, right? So how do people from the Middle East or North African origin respond to this? What happens when they respond when there is a MENA category? You see what I mean? And same thing with this over here, separate. We also have one just like this one, and then one with the MENA category here. Okay? So that's what we're testing. And so it goes to your question over there, how does the Amazigh population will respond when they see a MENA category or if they don't? And so we're going to be analyzing that data.
But there will not be a question, are you of
There's-
Middle Eastern
right.
origin, just like the Hispanic question?
Right, correct. Yeah. Thank you for, and you have a comment. or a
My
question.
second question, if we can go to the detailed ethnic examples, and these are the examples that are now from ancestry data, and the reason they do not include Somalia and Sudanese is because they're not an ancestry. Can you explain?
No,
Or-
because they're not currently in the region that we're identifying as Middle East or North Africa. We're looking to see from the feedback today whether you think that that is a,
So these examples are subject to change based on the recommendation of this group?
for 2020, all of the examples are potentially going to change. Our rationale today is that we're looking at the largest groups from Middle East and North Africa, the largest groups from the white European category, from Asia, as we have a rationale to really define why we posed what we did. Our research is really, as I mentioned earlier, going to help us learn if these examples are effective, if these examples are helpful, or if these examples may not be as effective. So again, we're looking to see, when you have these examples that represent the region, how do all respondents from that region identity, how do they respond? Okay, next we had Linda.
So I wanted to answer question number 2.
Okay.
And this is more actually for what I would consider our community to really think about this. I'm having a hard time understanding where the context is coming from the perspective of our community. So as a social service provider, thinking about what are we going to use this information for? Like, I don't really care about just counting how many people there are who are, quote, MENA. It's how we utilize this information that could be beneficial to our community. So the answer to number 2 for me is no. Because we have to understand that the way that people respond is based on the political context that we live in. So in 2010, we actually started a national campaign that was probably made a lot more work for the U.S. Census Bureau, but we started a campaign called Check It Right, You Ain't White. And we actually asked people to go into the other category and identify themselves as whatever, Yemeni, Arab American, whatever they wanted to say, even though we knew eventually those others go back in the white category. But seeing the response of more people wanting to fill out the census with the understanding that they weren't white. So I'm very personally, just for as folks are thinking about the feedback, what benefit do we get as a community from being white in the current political context as Arab Americans in the United States of America? Does it serve us right to call ourselves white and put ourselves back in the white box? And then to think about, for example, when we look at accessing federal, any types of federal support, for example, we lose out dramatically because we don't have a separate category to say. So we end up, even in the area where I live, because we're, quote, white, we're not seen as a priority area for city or state or federal funding. So we really need to understand what we're saying and how it impacts the community on the ground. So I'm just trying to push us more in a less academic conversation, because I know there's a lot of academia in the room and a lot of researchers and statisticians, which is great and wonderful, and we need that. But really understanding what the implications of the data and how it's going to be used to impact the community. So my recommendation is that MENA, that we are not white, and also not to be dwelling too much on the categories, because at the end of the day, it's self-identification.
Yes.
So I'm Palestinian. If I want to say I'm black, I'm black. That's on me.
Yes.
I can check whatever I'm black.
Absolutely.
So getting into the nitty-gritty there, I don't think is really helpful for this discussion to kind of move us forward. But for people to understand the political context that we live in 2015, and the understanding the benefits of being white or not white, and understanding, kind of, maybe because I'm an activist, but privilege that comes with being white and not having white privilege. I mean, people really have to understand the deep impact this has by considering us being able to say I'm Palestinian, but then still having to go and say I'm white. Like, I'm personally not cool with that.
Thank you for your comment, Linda. And that topic, which we had listed as our second question, I just want to reference that she's saying no to question 2, is also something that we're going to talk about as we get later into the
Right.
sessions for tabulation with Roberto.
Thank you, Linda, for your comments. So that reminds me again, every one of you in here has a voice, right, and an opinion, and I'm asking you for your feedback, just like Linda. So please fill out your forms. Tell us, do you agree with number 2 or not? That's what we want. That's why I invited all of you here. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but this is what we want. This is what we need. Okay? All right, next.
Next, Joseph.
Joe Casap. 2 things. Based on the comments that you received on the testing that was done earlier,
Yes.
It seems that there are, if you see on page 4, it says 737 comments on which countries or ethnic groups to include or to exclude in this category. Do you have any details on that and what has been suggested
Yes,
exactly?
and we're going to go into those details in our sessions this afternoon, where we present the groups that were recommended for inclusion and the groups who were recommended for exclusion. Interestingly, some of those groups were recommended for inclusion and exclusion. So we want to get your feedback today
Yes.
about the additional countries and groups that we're talking about.
And the other thing is on, let's see here, page 8, I believe, which is the dimension 4. I see that you were asking to mark one of the boxes, or at least one of the boxes here, but also there is a white box there.
Yes.
So I'm not sure how the respondent will mark here. Would he mark the small box or the white box?
Right, so that's the research question for us, given the option where there's only one box that is called white, that includes MENA identities, and when there's one that's called white and one that's called MENA, how will respondents who say that they're Palestinian or Egyptian or Somali, how will everyone who's given these different options respond? And then when we do the re-interview, what do we know about their responses that either confirms or provides some opposition to what they told us on the paper or on the internet? We want to find out if you identify as both white and MENA, then hopefully if that's how you self-identify, that's how you will report. But if you don't have that option and you report differently, that's what we're trying to learn.
And also on detailed ethnic example slide there, I see here that you have, again, a small box, but then a white box, and that allows you to mark the small box first and then write whatever
and
you
that's,
want on
they're
the white box?
they're not linked in the sense that you have to do both, but part of our work again is to see, will respondents mark the box for the larger category, Middle Eastern, North African, Black, Asian, whatever it is, and then will they write in detail? So we have different options for reporting both your major group and your detail group. When we showed the other dimensions for reporting online, for example, or even some of the examples that are in your notebooks, we're trying detailed checkboxes. Maybe those are more helpful than a write-in line. Maybe they're not. We're looking to see that through the research.
But the examples given are not adequate enough for all ethnicities.
So that's what we're, for all, meaning the entire world or the MENA region?
No, I'm talking about for the MENA region
Right,
now.
and so that's what we're trying to find. When we list examples, and we know from our work in the past that when we have an exhaustive list or what seems to be exhaustive, that doesn't work well.
And we don't have
When we
room
have
for-
too few, that doesn't work well either. We're trying to find what's the balance
So
to
the
provide.
respondent will be confined to the whatever
No,
choices given?
absolutely not.
That's not how it's told here, though.
But that's, so in the work, when we have the instructions that say to mark all boxes that apply and write in your detailed origins, we're looking to see, do we only get the origins that are written, or do we get people reporting other things? And that's part of the work for us to see how
Yeah,
effective
so
these
this is very
examples are.
important, and, you know, we agree with you. That's why we're concerned. We actually have more boxes here than we ever had before. This is one of the internet. And so for those groups that don't have a checkbox, right, you're saying, well, what about, we have a write-in line, and we're going to capture all those write-ins, okay? So they can write in what their origin is there. Even if it's not MENA, they can write in Latino in there, they can write in Black, they can write whatever they like. We capture all those write-ins, okay?
Well, the reason I'm mentioning this because we want to see the whole community respond to this particular decennial.
Absolutely.
From my 35 years experience with this, I don't see our communities, specific ethnic communities, that are responding well to this because they aren't sure they are included or not.
Right.
And that's
Well,
very important.
I
If they
could
see
tell-
they are included, then they will.
Right.
better
Well, I could
respond.
tell you right now, the current questions are completely excluded, right? There's nothing, right? They're going to some other race and writing it. So now we're testing a dedicated question for this community. So we're going to find out how they respond. That's one part of the test. And we're going to inform you about the results, about how the test performed. Okay? Okay, let's go
Thank
to
you,
the
Joe,
next.
for your
In the interest of
comments.
time, we have.
Oren.
Quick question. I think MENA, more than any area in the world, is very much, the identities are connected also to religion. How is
Yeah.
religion, was it ever reflected in the census? Or if there
We're
any
we're gonna,
discussion
we're
on that?
gonna, we're gonna discuss that in my section about the ethno-religious groups, and so that would, yes, we're gonna get to that shortly.
Let me go back to the back, and I'm sorry, sir, I don't see your name sideways. Fareed? Fareed, please.
Two quick comments in the interest of time. So your question about whether MENA population should be counted as white, I think it's a moot point from our perspective. I don't know anybody who would advocate for them to be included as white. So if there is anybody that advocates for that, then they should speak up. But from our population, it's a moot point. I mean, right? So, so that's one. The other question about examples, I think it's helpful to have smaller populations in your example that will help people identify with that category. It's not, if you already have Lebanese, for instance, which is, it's self-evident that they're in that category. I think it's more helpful to have another smaller population like Sudanese in the examples.
Thank you for your comments, and again, I want to reiterate what Roberto said. Please, I know we're not doing a poll in the room, but please report all of your comments that you have on the feedback paper so that we can record that and take that information back. Have more questions at this table? Yuxel?
And
Could you please turn your mic on, Yuxel? Thank you.
I see the examples are based on the state, as in Staat in German, political identity. What about the other ethnic groups such as Kurds, Assyrians, or whatever, so Armenians, so it's, so that should be also in the examples. And also the website, so is that, will there be all the groups listed on the website, or the website version of this form?
In terms of like every group in the world?
Yes, no,
So-
under MENA.
Well, one of the things that I mentioned before is that we know that we have hundreds of detailed groups within these categories.
Okay.
Not just countries, but also ethnic groups and pan-ethnic groups. It's impossible to list every group on the question, but every group can report as much detail as they'd like and whatever self-identity they have. We're looking to find out how do these different options help people to report in that way. So that's what the research is going to help us to see.
Okay. Just the examples also should include one of the groups which do not have, for example, state or political.
That's a
entity.
great feedback,
Yeah,
and
so
we want that. So we would like you to,
Because-
so those groups that you said right now, hey, we just don't want country of origin examples, right? You want some,
I
please
don't-
write those down on a
Yes,
feedback form. I want
exactly.
to
I
know what
don't-
those are.
For me, Iranian doesn't mean anything. If I say I'm Kurdish, that's, so the state factor is not, for me, it's meaningless in this case, or for the Kurds.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Thank you for your comments. And we have just how many more minutes? No, we have time. We do? Okay, let me go to the front table. I'll start with Khalid.
So it's just a general observation that I have is just to echo Linda's sentiment that the vehement response to question number 2 would be no. And to your surprise, it might be a moot question, but there are significant elements within the broader specifically the Arab American community who want to maintain whiteness, and the MENA American community more broadly that want to maintain whiteness. I think it's critical in the point about religion is a salient point, how religion others and the intersection of religion and ethnicity has a specific otherization on Muslim MENA Americans. And the conversation up till this point has been largely Levantine-centric and Christian-driven, and the demographics demonstrate that it's shifting away from that. So even though there's strong sentiment on the ground to maintain, whether it's per se or ceremonial whiteness, the demographics have shifted toward a sentiment or a position that really conflicts with that traditional baseline.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we have Sahar.
Thank you.
Please.
Okay, so I'm just going to answer the 3 questions.
Okay.
The first one is it should be combined primarily because race is a social construct and is not a very helpful term. Now, arguably so is origin, but I think that people, one, politically are more comfortable with identifying an origin, and it doesn't lead to the same kind of what I think are somewhat artificial divisions within various communities of, well, I'm white or I'm not white. But most people will accept, I do have an origin, and then they'll decide what is the origin that I self-identify, whether it is Kurdish or Iraqi or, et cetera. So my personal opinion is if you can put race or origin together, it can help to do what I think Linda is pointing out, which is not get sidetracked into these details and just focus on what we're really trying to do.
Okay.
The second is I believe that they should not be classified as white, primarily because we need to track them. For my personal work is in anti-discrimination.
Okay.
And so whether it is to shield them from discrimination or whether it is to have remedial programs that fund those types of groups, if you can't track them, you'll never be able to solve what is, in my opinion, very obvious, which is a very strong anti-Middle East, anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, whatever you want to call it. But there is some very serious problems right now. With regard to the third question, I guess I don't have an opinion. I would defer to the experts in terms of what's the best way to elicit the information. But my personal opinion is the more information we can get, the more helpful it is both to the government and to the activists and to the academics. And I do agree that if you put just nation states, that does signal that what we mean by Middle East and North Africa are only nation state identities. Okay. So even if you just include an example of Kurd or Assyrian or Chaldean, whatever you want to use, at least it signals that is also one way to self-identify. It's not limited to the nation state.
To the nation state.
And finally, I take issue with the fact that white is listed first as opposed to an alphabetical order. It signals to everybody in the country that it's a white supremacist society. And so either you have to at least justify why. So you could say this is the largest number of people, and you can do that and put a footnote and say we are listing this in the order based, here's the criteria we're listing. Because otherwise it really does signal white is what matters, and then maybe Hispanic matters second, and then black matters third. And then if you put MENA last, like you matter the least, it feeds into the racial hierarchies. So whatever system you choose is fine as long as it's objective and it's distinguishable, because you may not have that intent, but I'm just telling you that's what happens.
Okay. No, thank you, Sahar, for your comments. And I do want to footnote that in the point that she made, the groups are listed in population size in the United States, but your suggestion was to somehow note that for what we're doing. We do get that question a lot, and the alphabetical question comes up, but the rationale is that we're listing groups based on demographic pop size order.
It's going to change in about 50 years.
Yes. Okay, next we have John, please.
Hi, thanks. I think this is a great forum, by the way, and I want to thank the Census Bureau for doing this. It's a tremendous effort. So I'm primarily going to address the second question. I, agree with my colleagues, my law professor colleagues to my left, that unequivocally the Middle Easterners, North Africans should not be considered white. It's a bit of a judicial fiction that's been created through some case law over the years, and it doesn't really reflect the views of people on the ground in any way whatsoever, particularly in recent decades with rising rates of discrimination. It creates basically a catch-22 where Middle Easterners are treated as non-white anytime it's to their detriment, and treated as white only when it's to their detriment as well. So effectively, it's created a real problem. As I like to tell people, I'm not white at the airport. I never have been, and so let's stop the fiction and let's create the separate category. Along those lines, though, I would want to encourage maybe a bit of a radical proposal, which is if we're disaggregating the white category and taking Middle Eastern and North African out of it, why keep that term, white, on the census? Why not just simply put European? And go to the origins directly. The term white is deeply problematic. It's deeply political. It has a history of having a radically fluctuating definition over time. And if we're really going to what the core of what the census is saying it's trying to do, which is getting ancestry that's geographically determined, when you look at a map, there's no place that's called white. Last time I checked, and frankly, it's an inaccurate description. I've met very few white people in my life that I literally have white-colored skin. So let's go with European and disaggregate the category. I think that would be a tremendous service to diversity in our country and to the future of our country. One other just quick point on the categories on the third question, which is the categories that are shown under the Middle Eastern and North African category. The sub-nationality ethnicities, one thing I noticed is Armenians weren't listed in there, and Armenians weren't really listed in any of the other categories. And that seems unusual because there's a huge Armenian population. Obviously, it's a nationality in the sense that there is an Armenia. But for the purposes of the geographic region, there isn't an Armenia, and it's a huge sub-nationality ethnicity that maybe bears inclusion. And this ties into another point, which is if we're discussing ethnicities, many Iranian Americans prefer the term Persian, and that describes an ethnicity rather than a national origin. And that wasn't mentioned in any of the materials that I saw. The word Persian was never used, and I think that's especially considering that Iranians are one of the largest groups, and many of them don't identify themselves as Iranian, a country that's only existed really in that name since the 1920s. I think if we're identifying ethnicities, Iranians come in many shapes and sizes: Armenian, Kurdish, Assyrian, and Persian.
Thank you, John. These are great comments. This is what the feedback that we really need, and we want you guys to write that down again.
Yes.
I just want to assure John and the rest of you that we are going to get into the discussion this afternoon about the countries that are not shown here, or the ethnic groups that are not shown here in the feedback session, for you to give us your suggestions about what we're classifying and what we're not, or what is not being included. So we're going to get to that this afternoon. I have a comment here from Samar.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible, although for a lawyer that's sometimes difficult. We are also in the discrimination arena, along with Sahar. And I'm not a statistician, but when we get hit a lot of difficulties is when we try to sit there and talk to state agencies, to government agencies, and to talk to them about the statistics regarding discrimination against the Arab Middle Eastern population. And it's incredibly difficult to do that if we're classified as white. I'll give you an example. I sat on the commission in New Jersey on police standards, and we were talking about dealing with the consent decree that was entered into between the State Police of New Jersey and the Department of Justice because of certain profiling that was being done on the interstates with police stops and whatnot. And the head of the state police came out and was giving statistics saying, look, we are, 80% of our stops in these areas are of white people. They're not minorities. So upon questioning, I asked them, I said, well, how do you classify Arabs? And they said, well, we classify them as white. Now, they may not have an impact, generally speaking, But in the sections of New Jersey that have a very large Arab population, large concentration of Arabs, that would skew those statistics, okay? Especially if you're talking about a small sample size. So that's the problem we get into when we get folded into the white community as part of people that fight this discrimination, civil rights violations. We can't point to numbers, and they tend to skew numbers. The second and final point that I want to bring up, and that sort of ties into what Mr. Kassab said and this gentleman says. There is a lot of confusion among the minorities, such as the Chaldeans, the Assyrians, the Kurdish people. If they only see the geographical designation, they may not know that this is where they should respond to. They may not know, okay, this is where I fall into. Because a lot of them will not identify themselves as being part of that country, that geography. I mean, with the Kurdish people, it's a huge sticking point. Are they Syrians? Are they Iraqis? Or are they Kurdish? So if they only see Syria and Iraq, and they say, well, I'm not Syrian or Iraqi, they may get confused as to what they should put down. And so I think that's extremely important that you put at least one example of a minority group. Again, the issue of the Armenians was brought up. There's also the issues of the Circassians, which is a pretty distinct minority within the Middle East, originally from the Circassian Mountains in Russia. And now they because of ethnic cleansing, have migrated into Syria and Iraq and to Jordan. So that's another group that you may also want to consider. They have a huge population in New Jersey as well. So I'll just leave it with that.
Okay. Samar, thank you for your comments. And we're going to transition now to the next round of feedback. We really appreciate all the comments that you guys have. I want to just encourage you again to write down your comments for us so that we can record them as well. Roberto's next going to talk about our session B, where we're going to get into these different classifications that are being used for Middle Eastern and North African respondents and the term Middle Eastern or North African.
So actually what I'm going to do is, right, a lot of people are looking at me going, break, 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 and I agree. So we're going to deviate a little bit from the agenda, but it is 11 o'clock for a break. So this is the deal I'm going to make with you. Please come back in 15 minutes sharp, okay? 11:15, and we'll take a break now, have a cup of coffee, and we'll get started back on the agenda as soon as you return, okay? 11:15, thank you.